There's a moment each of us experiences but rarely talks about. It happens quietly, no music, no spotlight, just a realization. You look around and ask yourself, who is really walking with me? Not just those who follow you on social media, not the ones who text when it's convenient, but the voices that are always present, the ones that shape how you think, how you act, even how you pray. Sometimes those voices speak life. Other times they echo the noise of a world chasing everything but God. Have you ever caught yourself thinking thoughts that aren't really yours, repeating attitudes that don't reflect who you are or who you want to be? It doesn't always start with a fall. It starts with a shift, and that shift begins with influence. Influence isn't loud, it's quiet like a current. It doesn't pull all at once. It nudges, and if you don't notice it, you'll drift far. That's why this moment matters, because you don't just drift away from God, you drift toward whoever is closest. So who has your ear? Who has access to your thoughts? Who walks beside you in the quiet spaces of your life? Maybe it's time to ask a deeper question. Are the people around me pulling me closer to God or further from Him? In this prayer, we're not just talking about friendship, we're talking about spiritual alignment, about choosing voices that carry truth, and about asking God for the kind of people who don't just walk with you, they walk you closer to Him. Stay with me. This could change everything. You don't always notice when influence begins. It doesn't knock on the door, it doesn't ask for permission, it simply walks in, quietly, and begins to rearrange the furniture of your soul. Sometimes it enters through a laugh, a conversation, a late-night text. Other times it hides in what seems harmless, a joke, a small compromise, a friend's advice that feels easier than truth. The people you spend the most time with will shape you, not all at once, not obviously, but slowly, deeply, and eventually, completely. Have you ever started thinking differently and couldn't explain why? Have you found yourself doing things that once felt wrong, but now feel normal? That's how influence works. It's not just about peer pressure, it's about presence. The kind of presence that repeats itself enough times that you stop questioning it. Imagine you're standing in a river. At first, the water feels calm, gentle, safe, but underneath the surface, there's a current. A slow one, almost unnoticeable. If you stand there long enough, you'll move, even if you're not trying to. That's what happens when you're surrounded by people who are walking in a direction different from God's. You start drifting, not because you're rebellious, but because you're unguarded. And influence doesn't ask if you're ready. It doesn't wait until you're strong. It just pulls. Some friends speak courage into your heart. They remind you of who you are, especially when you forget. They challenge you to be better, not because they're judging you, but because they love you enough to push you forward. But other friends, they don't need to attack your faith to weaken it. They just need to ignore it long enough that you start doing the same. They joke about things that make you uncomfortable. They call your convictions too serious. They celebrate things you're trying to heal from. And little by little, you begin to lower the volume of God's voice to make room for theirs. You may tell yourself you're strong enough to handle it, that you're just being a good friend, that you're not being influenced, but even strong walls can be worn down by soft rain. Over time, no one is immune to influence, not even the most faithful believer. The problem is we think danger always looks dangerous. We expect the enemy to come with a pitchfork, loud, obvious, evil. But sometimes he just sends someone charming, someone fun, someone who seems harmless, but slowly, silently leads your soul into a fog. And when you're in a fog, you stop seeing clearly. You begin to question what used to be obvious. You excuse what used to be unacceptable. You entertain thoughts that used to be warning signs. Why? Because the people closest to you became louder than your conscience. Let's be honest. Not everyone deserves a front row seat in your life. Not every friend belongs in every season. Some people are meant to walk with you for a while and then stay behind. but we get attached. We don't want to seem rude. We confuse loyalty with spiritual blindness. We tell ourselves that loving others means never saying no, that being kind means never creating distance. But here's a truth we often forget. You can love someone without giving them influence. You can care deeply without allowing them to lead you. You can offer kindness without opening every door to your heart. Because your soul is sacred, your heart is where God speaks, and if that space gets too noisy, his voice becomes harder to hear. It's not about thinking you're better than anyone. It's about protecting the treasure God placed inside you. When you let the wrong voices shape you, you risk losing the clarity God gave you. And clarity is what helps you make the right choices, take the right paths, and hold on to what matters most. So the real question is, who has that kind of access in your life? Who do you run to when you need advice? Who shapes your language, your priorities, your dreams? Are they pulling you toward purpose or away from it? Are they helping you walk in peace or keeping you stuck in patterns God already freed you from? This isn't about judgment. It's about alignment, because the people closest to you are like mirrors. They either reflect who God says you are or distort the image until you forget what you look like. You can't walk north while holding hands with someone walking south. Eventually, someone has to let go. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for your soul is to release what's pulling you in the wrong direction, even if it's comfortable, even if it's familiar, even if it once felt right. God never called you to stay where it's easy. He called you to walk where He leads. And sometimes that means choosing friends who don't just agree with your faith, but strengthen it. There's something dangerous about comfort. When you get used to a certain environment, certain voices, certain behaviors, they begin to feel normal, even when they're not healthy. Not all danger is dramatic. Sometimes it feels like home, and that's where the warning begins. You see, spiritual drift doesn't happen because someone wakes up one day and decides to walk away from God. It starts when small choices become habits, and those habits become your new direction. And in most cases, this shift isn't caused by situations, it's caused by relationships. You don't need to be attacked to be changed. You only need to be surrounded. There's a slow erosion that takes place when the people around you don't reflect your convictions. Not because they're bad people, but because they're walking in a different direction than you were called to walk. And when you're walking alongside someone headed elsewhere, eventually your feet start matching their pace. That's why Scripture warns us, not out of fear, but out of protection. There are moments when the ones closest to us pull us away from truth, not with lies, but with silence. They don't push you to abandon your faith, they just never talk about it. They don't tell you to stop praying, they just never join you when you do. They don't ask you to compromise. They just make you feel weird when you don't. And over time, something shifts. What once felt like a red flag now feels like a preference. What once made you pause now makes you laugh. And what once drew you to God now feels like a distant memory. This is the silent warning, not the loud one, not the storm, not the earthquake, not the fire, but the gentle breeze that carries you in a direction you never meant to go. It's subtle, it's emotional, it's relational, but most of all, it's spiritual. That's why it matters who walks beside you. Because in your hardest moments, when your faith is weak, when your emotions are loud, when your vision is blurry, you won't rise to the level of your intentions. You'll fall to the level of your influences. And when your circle lacks spiritual clarity, you absorb their confusion as your own. You start to rationalize what you would have rejected before. You start to explain away the uneasiness in your soul. You call it maturity, growth, balance. But deep down, something sacred is fading. So how do we recognize this? How do we know when we're no longer being sharpened but dulled? It starts with asking honest questions. Am I still as passionate about my relationship with God as I used to be? Do the people around me challenge me spiritually or just entertain me? When I fall, who lifts me back up with truth? When I succeed, who reminds me where the glory goes? If the answers lead you to silence, You may be surrounded but not supported. You may be loved but not led. And that's a warning worth listening to. We're told to walk with the wise, not because wisdom is exclusive, but because it's contagious. You become like those you walk with. If your closest companions chase temporary satisfaction, you'll begin to desire what doesn't last. If they ignore God's voice, you'll find yourself doing the same. But if they live in step with truth, if they pursue grace with boldness, if they speak life, even when it's uncomfortable, then you'll grow in ways you never imagined. This isn't about labeling people as good or bad. It's about recognizing spiritual alignment, because alignment determines direction, and direction determines destination. You can love people deeply and still set boundaries clearly. You can honor their presence without handing them influence. You can care without compromise. This is the spiritual alert, not because people are dangerous, but because influence is powerful. If we don't stay awake, we'll let charm lead us where character never would. We'll choose connection over conviction. And in doing so, we'll drift, not in one big moment, but in 1,000 small ones. So today, let this be your call to awareness, not to panic, not to push people away, but to pause, to pray, to examine. Ask yourself, am I choosing voices that push me toward holiness, or am I letting comfort drown out conviction? Because in a world full of noise, it takes wisdom to recognize which voice is shaping your soul. When we think about relationships, it's easy to base our choices on feelings, comfort, history, or even fun. But what happens when our example isn't a friend, a mentor, or a personality we follow, but the life of Jesus? Christ didn't build connections the way the world teaches. He wasn't drawn to status. He didn't chase approval. He didn't keep people close just to feel supported. Every connection he made had eternal significance. That's not to say he rejected people. Far from it. He welcomed those others avoided. He sat at tables with outcasts. He gave time to the broken and dignity to the ignored. But here's what's often missed. He never allowed those relationships to shape his mission. Jesus walked among tax collectors, sinners, skeptics, and even traitors, but their lifestyles never altered his identity. He influenced their hearts without absorbing their habits. He carried peace into chaotic environments without letting chaos affect his peace. His compassion didn't lead him into compromise. His mercy didn't cancel his boundaries. His love never cost him his truth. Let that sink in. So often we are taught that being like Christ means saying yes to everyone, keeping every relationship alive, never distancing ourselves from anyone. But Christ himself walked away when necessary. He withdrew to pray. He removed himself from crowds. He knew when to stay and when to step back. He didn't invest equally in every person. He had many followers, but only 12 were invited into daily life. And among those 12, 3 walked even closer: Peter, James, and John. This wasn't favoritism. It was intentional placement. Jesus understood something we often forget. Intimacy requires discernment. Depth must be guarded. Access should be entrusted, not assumed. He loved everyone, but he didn't open his heart to everyone the same way. And when he did choose closeness, it was with people who shared the Father's purpose. Even in his final hours, Jesus invited his inner circle to stay with him while he prayed. He didn't ask the crowd to carry that burden. He turned to those who had walked closely, listened deeply, and believed fully. That speaks volumes. Now pause and ask yourself, do the people closest to me reflect God's calling over my life? Are the ones I trust with my secrets pointing me toward truth or pushing me toward comfort? When Jesus was tempted in the desert, there were no friends nearby, no disciples, no support group, just him, the Spirit, and the enemy. Yet even when he was alone, he stood firm. Why? Because his foundation wasn't built on others, it was built on obedience. But notice what happens after that moment. Jesus returns from the wilderness, and the first thing he does is begin building community. Why? Because even though he could stand alone, he knew the power of walking with the right people. He didn't gather a crowd for validation. He gathered a team for transformation. These were not perfect men. They misunderstood him. They doubted. They failed. But they were willing to walk with him, to grow, to learn, to follow. Jesus poured into people who were open to change. He shared his life with those who wanted to carry the message, not dilute it. So here's the invitation for us. Be like Jesus in how you love, but also in how you choose. Don't confuse kindness with permission. Don't mistake tolerance for direction. You can extend grace without granting access. You can be generous without sacrificing your soul's health. You can walk with people without letting them lead your walk. If Christ, the Son of God, set boundaries, chose his inner circle with care, and stayed anchored in truth, shouldn't we? This doesn't mean cutting everyone off. It means recognizing the difference between outreach and intimacy. It means knowing who can join you at the table and who should stay in the crowd. And most importantly, it means living with the awareness that who surrounds you eventually shapes you. Jesus didn't just save souls. He modeled how to live with purpose, clarity, and relational wisdom. Let his example become your guide, because if he, perfect, holy, and unshakable, chose his relationships carefully, then so should you. It rarely begins with a loud voice or a dramatic choice. Sometimes the most important decisions happen in quiet moments, when no one's watching, no one's pushing, and no one even knows a decision is being made. It happens inside. A soft shift, a pause in your heart, a moment where you realize something has to change. Maybe you've been carrying relationships that once felt life-giving, but now leave you empty. Maybe you've laughed along with people who slowly turned your convictions into punchlines. Maybe the people you've leaned on for comfort never pointed you toward healing, only distraction. And somewhere along the way, without even noticing, you stopped walking in the direction you once promised God you would follow. That's the danger of delay. The longer you wait to choose differently, the more normal dysfunction begins to feel. But here's the truth. No one will make the choice for you. The people around you might never ask you to draw the line. They might never tell you to protect your soul. They might be perfectly comfortable with things staying just the way they are. But you're not called to comfort. You're called to holiness. You weren't made to simply fit in. You were made to reflect something greater. And that starts with who's allowed to walk beside you. You can love people deeply without giving them a permanent seat in your spiritual life. You can care about someone without handing them the wheel. There's a difference between being compassionate and being careless with your calling. So maybe this is your moment, not one filled with noise or applause, but a quiet resolve rising inside you that says, I will no longer let unhealthy voices guide me. It's not dramatic. It's not emotional. It's simply clear. You begin to see patterns for what they are. You recognize the weight of influence. You understand that every person in your life is either adding strength or draining it. And you begin to choose wisely, not out of bitterness, not out of fear, but from a place of alignment with the path God designed for you. Letting go doesn't mean you've failed. It means you've grown. Creating distance isn't rejection, it's protection. And walking away from what's familiar doesn't mean you're ungrateful. It means you value your spiritual health more than your social comfort. You weren't created to blend in with every crowd. You were chosen to carry light, even if that means walking with fewer people beside you. There will be seasons when your path feels lonelier because you're choosing it with intention. But don't mistake emptiness for failure. Sometimes God clears space before filling it with what's right. And here's the beauty. When you decide to walk in truth, heaven responds. When you create space for voices that honor God, He brings people into your life who speak with clarity, love with purpose, and walk with integrity. But it starts with the choice. A private, personal, quiet choice. To guard your atmosphere, to protect your focus, to walk in alignment. Because if you don't choose, someone else will choose for you. And influence doesn't ask for permission. It just acts. So today, stop waiting for a sign. You've heard enough. You've seen enough. Now it's time to act. Who gets to shape your life from this moment forward? Let your answer not be loud, but firm. Let it be quiet and unshakable, because the loudest transformations often begin with the stillest of decisions. Father in heaven, I come before you with a heart open and honest. Thank you for revealing that not every relationship brings life. Thank you for showing me that who surrounds me shapes where I go. I ask that you bring people into my life who reflect your heart, those who strengthen my walk, not weaken my steps. Send voices that lift me higher, not ones that silence my convictions. If there are connections pulling me away from your will, give me the courage to step back. Grant me wisdom to choose wisely and grace to walk humbly. Teach me to love others without losing my own soul, to offer kindness without surrendering my values, to be a light without letting the darkness around me dim the fire within. And for those who don't yet know you, help me be a bridge, not a barrier. Let my life be a reflection of your goodness. Shape me into someone who carries truth with gentleness and walks with integrity. May every relationship I nurture bring me closer to your purpose. Today, I choose you first, and those who walk in your direction. Amen.